Hi folks, I'm Alan Watt and this is Cutting Through the Matrix on the 6th of January 2019. It's kind of strange saying 2019 now, and I guess it'll take a little while into the getting used to signing 2019 and anything we have to sign these days. It takes a little while, doesn't it? Sometimes too, even at the end of the year, you'll find yourself, for some reason, daydreaming or whatever, and even putting a 2016 or whatever, some nice moment in the past down on things that you sign. At least I find that occasionally. Because after all, we're living through an awful system right now. And by awful, I really mean that the important thing is to realize that it is a system. We do live in a system. And in all ages, you're in some kind of system, obviously. If you take the Middle Ages across Europe, you had a religious system which gave you, to most people in the different strata of society, it gave them purpose in a sense. And we need purpose. Without purpose, you have nihilism, and without purpose and belief in anything at all, you can become a terrible tyrant. That's also part of it too. And that's one of the big problems of today in their society of materialism, is that materialism is not supplying everything that we need, obviously. You can't buy it, as I say. There are even songs about that too, as you well know. But you can't buy it. You can't buy the things that you need. You can buy the basic things that you need, obviously, the material goods and food and all the rest of it, and heat, shelter, clothing, that kind of thing. You buy these things and food, but things that you really need. However, it doesn't supply all your needs inside you. When you look at the big think tanks that run our systems and the advised governments, as I say, we don't vote the think tanks in, they pre-exist. Every particular party and government that comes in and goes out. And I've gone through the history of the big ones that helped run the world for well over 100 years. And especially the Royal Institute for International Affairs and its American branch, CFR, Council on Foreign Relations, a private organization. And it was the organization, when it was called the Milner Group, that really was behind the setting up of the last part of the British Empire, as they called it. And they wanted a world governmental system. And they wanted a common culture across the planet, which, of course, is a bit ridiculous too, because you can't just go and destroy people's cultures across the world to suit yourself, or because your own elite think it's their right to do so. However, they definitely tried that. And even today, you get the big arguments about, well, maybe the British Empire wasn't all that bad. But it isn't until you strip away so much of the myth of it all that you start to understand the picture. And we obviously all hate, we hate getting our myths destroyed. Every country's got them. Every nation has myths. And they all have foundation myths and so on too. But when you look at the real histories of, say, the British Empire, to do with commerce and piracy. Piracy was a big part of it in Queen Elizabeth's day, the first days, in the Middle Ages. And, you had Walter Raleigh and all these different people who were basically pirates, and Francis Drake. And they also could use their pirate ships for defending the coastline of Britain against incomers like the Spanish Armada. And the world really is always living in, as I say, a system of some kind or another that predominates. And within the systems, you still have power plays of those who want to dominate it. Now, the Council on Foreign Relations even has its own video out there, they did, saying that they are the establishment that basically run all the big agencies within the USA, for instance. They do it within Canada as well. And as I say, they've got branches of the same organization, where it's called Royal Institute for International Affairs, or CFR across the world. There's no country that doesn't have a branch working there. And they have direct access to governments, and they can advise all politicians in every government across the planet. A so-called private organization. They also, of course, a long time ago, remember, set up the banking system as we know it today with the big World Bank, the Bank for International Settlements, the International Monetary Fund, which comes in to collect debts and cuts your system to the bone in the process, including often destroying healthcare systems and things like that. Folk don't know that the same organization, this private club that started off in London, had the IMF in during Margaret Thatcher's reign in Britain, cutting back on all these different things for the social services in the UK during her period there. Countries try to keep it as quiet as possible when the IMF is in. The IMF might be in Ireland right now, I'm not quite sure, but I know that, I think they probably are actually. I saw a documentary a few years ago where Ireland had been encouraged, as always, this is how they work, to borrow money like there's no tomorrow. And then they crashed the economy to an extent, and they're landed with all this massive debt, which grows all the time through compound interest. That's the beauty of this type of money system for those who own it, and it is owned. It's all privately owned. But getting back to this world governmental idea, the general public are generally oblivious to it. It's like everything else, and I'll just touch on this briefly, this system here, of how you're taught to perceive things. And I use analogies which are also factual in what I'm about to say. For instance, you all know comedians. Take a comedian, for instance. You see the product. The comedian is the end of the product. Behind the comedian, professional comedians, you have batteries, a whole company, you might say a corporation, running that frontman product. You have teams of writers for the jokes. You have the image makers that literally create the comedian's image, his dress style, the whole thing. They even have department managers who come on and train with them to show them how to work through a joke with body language and all the rest of it. They have stylists and fashion designers, all that kind of stuff, all working together. They have the corporate boys behind them who must advertise this person on a tour abroad, and they must work out the hotels. It's a corporation, basically. So you see the end product. Most folk never think beyond seeing the end product. That's all. They think this person just happens to be there, or he'll appear on television or on stage, do his own thing, and it's all down to their skill and talent. That's how you're meant to perceive this. It's no different than anybody going on tour to give lectures. It's the same thing, same machinery behind it all. And the person who gives a lecture is coached, trained, the thing is produced, and you're given the final product. Thinking, my God, this person's brilliant. You don't realize it could be an actor quite easily, and sometimes, and quite often actually, they are. And that's the same as the politicians. Politicians get money. I read the articles years ago on one of the radio shows I was on, where in Britain, and as an example, all the countries I'm sure are the same now, every politician was paid quite a big sum of money on expenses for training by special trainers on public relations and how to avoid answering, factually answering questions, how to get around it, etc. And they were classified as acting lessons. What I'm saying to you is nothing is real out there, at least the way you're taught to naively perceive them. When you see, again, a comedian on, say, a talk show on television, and you see maybe an actor on beside them as another guest, and they're chatting about, and they all seem to know each other, you don't realize that it's all been rehearsed in advance. The questions are all laid out before the guests even turn up. It's part of the contract. They make contracts before they come on these shows. And it's the same with even Kissinger used to do this. They all do this. If you inquired from them to come on for an interview, the agencies that ran Kissinger and all the other ones out there will put a list of questions they'll allow to be asked. They'll tick off what they don't want, etc. And that goes back and forth until they've all agreed, then it's signed legally in front of lawyers, notarized, and then they'll come on. But all you'll see when they're on the stage, whether it's a comedian or an actor or a couple or whatever it happens to be, on some particular well-known talk show on television, it's always been this way, is the joviality and what you think is spontaneous jokes and all fun and so on. They're getting paid big money for being on. They don't just come on to pass the time. But you're given the end product, and you'll think you know the characters, you've seen them so often on television or whatever it happens to be. And that's the show of it. It's a show, it's show business. And it's always big money. Now, it's the same as I say with politicians. Even professors go through a lot of this, because when they launch professors to help lead the minds of the public, they're launched on big talk shows and run often by the same organization, the top that I'm talking about, in fact, to help guide the people, because the people are followers. That's how they see the public. And this is not my opinion on it. This is pretty well out there textbooks. And they gave the CFR, for instance, recruited George Clooney and I think Angela Jolie, and they have others, actors, actresses and so on, and personalities and philosophers and things like that. They'll bring them on and make them stars. If they're not already stars, they'll make them stars, because the people will subject their own awareness, you might say, and observations, and put them down to a second-tier level, and put the person that's presented as the expert above themselves. They'll do that quite easily, actually. There's a whole scientific technique to doing it. So what we're living in is a kind of fake reality. It's coincidental, I suppose, but I was thinking about that yesterday and today. I remember Adam Curtis has got some good documentaries out there. But Adam Curtis, as you know, also has had a lifetime of work at the BBC. He has access to incredible archives there. And he will go through a process of trying to show patterns in society and culture and times that we live through, either in commerce or financial systems or whatever it happens to be. But he also makes it very simplistic, and quite unfortunately, he'll often miss the big elephant in the room in certain areas. He won't discuss them. But he did, and no doubt too, even behind Adam Curtis is a big machine too. So he presents it in a certain way that you're seeing as, again, the finished product. But he did talk about this system of what seems to be unreal, and he called it hyper-normalization after a Russian who lived through the Cold War in Russia, Soviet Russia, who called it that very term, hyper-normalization, where everyone knew that everything that were being told by the media, by this totalitarian system, was false. What they were being told, how great this was and how great that was, didn't mesh with their own personal lives' experiences on a day-to-day basis. Didn't mesh. But no one would talk about you. You accepted that there's something wrong, but you put on a pretense. The citizen would be put on a pretense of acting like everybody else would act, and you'd all pretend to each other it was okay. And we're living in a more complex system, but similar to that today, with computerization, with algorithms monitoring your every move, everything you think about, almost actually predict what you're going to think about. You'd be surprised at how predictable you are. And today they've got most everybody's data actually down to a fine tree. But he mentions it too that even the internet and the ether, he's talking about the ether all around you, is an echo chamber of you. That's one part of it. I would add to it and say it's an echo chamber of what's given out to be the official line of your present day's reality. But it's also, as he said, an echo chamber, because the algorithms are all about you. If you go on YouTube and you look at 2 or 3 things, in no time at all, it's figured out your age, what you like, probably what country you came from, because it's all languages, remember, and what you like to look at for entertainment. Entertainment tells an awful lot about the person. What you like tells you a lot about you as a person. But in no time at all, it'll start on the right-hand column on YouTube, for instance, giving a whole list of similar things or similar movies or similar whatever, or eras in the genre that's decided that you're going to like. Now, the internet was promoted for years, as even before the public actually got it for themselves. It's promoted as a system that would free up people, change the system into a more progressive system, and break free of this staid, fixed system. That's how it was portrayed. That's how people saw it at the time, at least those who ruled the world and wanted to move on to the next phase. Instead of that, it's turned into basically, yeah, you can get lost forever and enjoy yourself forever, but it's really turning into a control mechanism, and that really was always the function for those at the very, very top. Don't forget that DARPA and ARPA, but DARPA ruled the system, created the system. It was a military-industrial complex thing, not by mistake. And the last thing rulers will ever do is allow you to have total freedom. Well, even that's a whole separate subject with freedom. The last thing that they would do is allow you to have more freedom than they think is necessary. You're given just enough to get by without having a breakdown, and to pass the time thinking it's okay. And they hope you'll consume and produce and consume until you die without giving the system any problems. That's the ideal citizen. Remember that the United Nations stated a few years ago that the perfect citizen, the ideal citizen, world citizen, is a good producer and consumer. So if you get past a certain age, or you get ill and you can't work and you can't produce, but you're still consuming, then you're a burden, basically. And that's how we're truly seen. We're seen as units, economic units. And that's not a humane way to look at us at all. It can't last forever. You get breakdowns in society. You get people going crazy, flipping out and doing crazy, crazy things. That's what happens. And they know this, of course, and they try to give you more entertainment, more ways to distract you. They also find, by the way, that during wartime and restrictions and martial law during wartime, it astonished me they're even doing these studies in World War II. There are less suicides and less domestic mayhem, murders and violence during wartime. Because folk, strange enough, people then feel that regardless of their own personal situation, they're part of something bigger. There's a cause, and that gives them purpose during wartime, as you all pool together. And so when there's a lack of some kind of vision, that things start falling apart. So we're living in an incredibly controlled system right now. You can go and protest anything you want, as long as you get a license to do so. A permit to go and protest is whatever place you're going to meet. And you can have your little chanting thing and put your signs up, do your thing and go home. It's funny to watch that in London, because it's like one group after another with their permits, and all take their place, then leave, and take their place and leave. And they say their piece, and it's just like a routine hobby with a lot of them now. Nothing's having an impact. And that's exactly what Curtis mentioned at one point in one of his talks. We accept things, including the wars, including the latest wars in, say, Yemen or whatever, with yawn, 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 because deep down, like hypernormalization, we feel there's nothing we can do about it. This big system that runs it all is out of our hands. It never was in our hands, and that's the truth of it. That is the truth of it. You'd never know either. The massive machinery, getting back to just the smaller level of, say, an individual comedian or a personality that's getting promoted to be a leader in society, in a professional field. They create the stars. I gave the talks years ago on the machinery, including the groups that brought you big pop organizations, rock organizations, but they created the stars. You make the star. You can pick them out and you make them, you groom them and make them into the star. And to do that with scientists today. They first tried that in a bigger way with Einstein. And all the media went into action to promote him as some kind of star and some kind of genius. And that's been used many times since. It still is being used today to promote so-called experts that you're supposed to think they're much more intelligent than you. You see the final product, as I say, and they're promoted so you'll follow them. And they're picked up immediately by the big boys and promoted. But you see the end product, the finished product, as I say. Nothing is spontaneous in this big system. Nothing at all. And I've always said you've got to be careful of what and who you follow, because you're always given your leaders. If they're wealthy and become even more wealthy, then it's a good chance, a very good chance, they're being groomed, produced for you, and you're seeing the polished, managed product. Really is how it is. It's quite an amazing system we're living within, though, because there's never been so controlled as it is today. Because there's so many of these stars out there across the world today, in every country. Polished, managed, often belong to the same organizations across the world. They're all on board with the same things to guide the public that follows them. And for every fractured part of society, whichever you belong to, every little fractured part, because they've divided society up into all kinds of little subgroups. They've already got leaders out there for you. It's quite beautiful in a sense, if you're a master manipulator, to observe this. That's what you're seeing, how it's done. And it works awfully well, doesn't it? Where politicians now really, I noticed that with the last, the US election there with the midterm and other elections across the world. You're not getting what they can do or what their background is, what they can do to serve in the public. That pretense is even gone. They're giving you what's really a made product. It's a star type thing, man or woman or whatever it happens to be, or whatever it's called. They're this or they're that, where it's either the proclivity for a particular sexual thing or whatever. That's like the qualification. What's going on here? I mean, who cares what they do? And no, the fact is, can they do the job to serve the public? All the public. It's not even asked anymore. Because there's no real pretense they're there to serve anybody except themselves and their masters. That's really how bad it is today. But getting back to all of that, the big think tanks, the big think tanks like the Royal Institute for International Affairs, CFR, and all of the other groups that they own, it's a big consortium of groups and specialized think tanks for different specialized problems and so on, or areas. The same guys who set up the United Nations and run that too at the very top, and the banking system, they never believed in democracy. I've mentioned this so many times before. The Club of Rome, if you read their own books, will tell you that the problem with the world, as far as they're concerned, is this silly thing called democracy. They can't get anything done. But then they're a branch of a think tank that works for the Royal Institute for International Affairs, CFR. And you'll find that the Royal Institute for International Affairs, long ago, back in the days of Carter, Jimmy Carter, I think it was, came out with not just the CFR group that most of the media is all involved in, and power, really people who influence society belong to it, and the big moguls of corporations and business. But they also created the Trilateral Commission. And the Trilateral Commission are the real technocrats behind the scenes who are not elected by anything, they're appointed. And and the public often don't even know they exist. But they go across the world deciding on collapsing economies or working at central banking systems and even replacing prime ministers in some countries who are default on loans, national loans, and replacing them with their own technocratic bosses. that are unelected straight in. They're put straight in by the central banks to run the country. Now, there's too much to just talk, because this is spontaneous, pretty well spontaneous what I'm talking about here. But there's so much involved in this, I might do a couple of shows, I don't know. But here's the thing. If we go into the actual talks of some of the top leaders we've had, some of them we still have, in fact, other ones have died recently, even Zbigniew Brzezinski, who again was a technocrat, remember, who was plucked out of a top university, and he was put up there in the CFR and the Trilateral Commission. He came out with it very, very Adam Curtis like proclamations, and visions of the future were very similar to Curtis's stuff, because they all come from the same milieu of how do we run the world, how do we control the public, how can we divert the public, how can we give the public vision that will be in our interest to rule over them, etc., etc. And even though they use democracy, and they'll even use your national military as a pretense of using democracy, but it's nothing to do with that. It's for gain, of course. Then you come back to any reality at all. For instance, here is a quote by Zbigniew Brzezinski, and it was in the 1970s from the book Between Two Ages, and America's role in the technotronic era, he called it. And the technotronic, or technetronic, he called it NE-tronic. He said was a system, and he mentioned it, where radio waves, as an example, different kinds of quiet weaponry, could be used across nations and continents, including your own one. And they could basically control the minds of the public, at least the emotions of them, make them placid or angry, depending on the frequency, and things like that. It's a weapon system. Weapons don't have to completely disable you or make you bleed or kill you. A weapon is used to coerce you and force you into doing something, where they just point at you and tell you what to do, or, or you don't even know what's happening to you. It's still a weapon. But anyway, it's also to do with control. It's always control, where you point a gun at someone to make them do something, or a microwave weapon, the thermal weapons that they've shown on television umpteen times that make your skin superheat, etc. And they can step it up to any frequency they want, by the way, or whatever it means they're going to use. But the fact is, the technotronic era, he says, involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled society. Okay? For the harder thinking, I'll repeat that again. The technotronic era involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled society. Controlled society, right? Such a society would be dominated by an elite, unrestrained by traditional values. Soon it would be possible to assert almost continuous surveillance over every citizen and maintain up-to-date complete files containing even the most personal information about the citizen. These files will be subject to instantaneous retrieval by the authorities. So let's break it down again here. This guy was up there, way up yonder, with all the different top military organizations on their panels at the very top, and all the agencies, telling you how it is now. But he was mentioning this back in the 1970s, when he wrote this book. The technotronic era involves the gradual appearance of a more controlled society. Gradual appearance. It's got to be gradual, because if it's sudden, you might notice it and complain. So you just adapt into it. Gradual appearance of a more controlled society. Such a society would be dominated by an elite, unrestrained by traditional values. Now, traditional values, that's the rights of humanity. They couldn't be crossed before. So this group would be unrestrained by traditional values. Traditional values, the rights of the individuals, wouldn't stop them doing what they wanted to do with those people. They can do what they want. Soon it will be possible to assert almost continuous surveillance over every citizen. In the 1970s, and maintain up-to-date complete files containing even the most personal information about the citizen. These files will be subject to instantaneous retrieval by the authorities. Now you go back to one of his predecessors working in the big global system, working on the culture and the minds of the public, Lord Bertrand Russell, who also belonged to the same global elite of Royal Institute for International Affairs. He also worked for MI5, at very least, maybe MI6 too, during World War II at least. And he fills the exact title of being, or the exact role of what Carroll Quigley talked about, that where he said that our organization, that is secret to an extent, it's semi-secret, but he said that in his own writings, in his own book. He said it has existed for almost 60 years. He wrote that in the 60s, 1960s. This book. This is Carroll Quigley I'm talking about now. And he said it's often mistaken for the communists. What he was referring to there was the Rees Commission that had done an investigation into the tax-free foundation supporting the far left, the communistic sects. And what he's pertaining to is that's really us running things. And he said that we have the same kind of goals. Socialism is the best way to control people for those who are the experts and the rich on top, if you understand that. Anyway, getting back to Bertrand Russell. Bertrand Russell said back in the 1940s and 50s, in his big part, for he worked with the Macy Group, the Frankfurt School, all these different big groups that were meant to change culture and society. And Lord Bertrand Russell said that shortly, with the proper techniques, anyone can convince anyone else of anything. He's talking about the ability to do complete persuasion and be completely believed by anybody and everybody at the same time with scientific techniques. Long before Brzezinski here, but Brzezinski would have all his inner writings, Quigley's writings and Lord Bertrand Russell's writings. Of course he would. It's the same organization behind it all, with the same goal. Now, what else did Brzezinski say in his books? People in governments and economies of all nations must serve the needs of multinational banks and corporations. People, governments, and economies of all nations must serve the needs of multinational banks and corporations. He also said, today it's infinitely easier to kill 1 million people than to control 1 million people. And he also said, speaking of a future at most only decades away, an experimenter in intelligence control asserted, I foresee a time when we shall have the means and therefore inevitably the temptation to manipulate the behavior and intellectual functioning of all the people through environmental and biochemical manipulation of the brain. Very similar in some ways, again, to Bertrand Russell long before him. And that's no coincidence at all, actually, because Russell also said that by means of injection, and he's talking about medications, but injection, they can control people. Environmental and biochemical manipulation of the brain. He also said we have a large public that is very ignorant about public affairs and very susceptible to simplistic slogans by candidates who appear out of nowhere, have no track record, but mouth-appealing slogans. Isn't that ever, ever, ever true today? As I've mentioned before, what did they tell you their qualifications are? What did I say earlier? See, understand you're not in a true reality anymore. You're run by experts, including the products they put in front of you, which are the people that you're following. And politicians too. They're produced, created, and managed for all the different factions of society that will follow them. This is also what Brzezinski said. The society will be dominated by an elite of persons free from traditional values who will have no doubt in fulfilling their objectives by means of purged techniques with which they will influence the behavior of people and will control and watch the society in all details. It will become possible to exert a practically permanent watch on each citizen of the world. And it goes on and on and on. He's only one of them. They're all the same. But again, the public are not encouraged to look into these things at all. You're encouraged to go into the kind of, almost, you might call it the tabloid version, almost a comic version of what the reality is, the pantomime of politics as it's presented to you today. That's what it is. It's a pantomime, isn't it? It's a soap opera. But it's under control. You might have the appearance, or you might think it's all becoming chaotic, but it's under control, right? And you definitely have, again, I'll even put up a link to Curtis's The Mayfair set to show you how Britain had to, again, back to piracy again, how Britain, after the Suez Crisis, where it was ordered, Britain was really put down by the US and told to back out of there, along with France. And that was the signal that Britain's power was pretty well over. This entity or corporation called Britain is based in London. Because that's what it was. It was there to serve the interests of big corporations. And certainly not the people. Any more than it is today, for that matter. You'll see how some of the people who were in the managerial military classes in that time, from old families again, with lords and titles and so on, they got together and they couldn't let the old system just die off. And Britain was stagnating. It was left with incredible debts as a corporation from the massive world wars, 2 of them. The public had only recently been given any kind of health care in the late 40s, I think it was, in the early 50s, for the first time in their history. And the same with welfare too, etc. Didn't exist before. The people were plundered and used and used and used and used for centuries for a corporation, including, this includes England as too. And they recruited people from orphanages, like that's where they stocked their recruits for the military for centuries from, pretty well. There's good documentaries out there, even by the very authorities that are still running your brains, which is like the BBC. But the old documentaries had to admit to this kind of thing. Nothing is what you think it is. You're trained to see things, just like you're trained to think that those stars that you see on television with some talk show host, and they're all laughing and joking, and it seems to be spontaneous. You don't realize it's all managed and it's paid for, and they're getting paid salaries to appear there. And you're looking at professional products. It's the same with everything else. But Britain got some of these families, couldn't let the idea of what they saw as Britain just go down the tube, and they formed their own little pirate bands, and they went across the Middle East and other places, even into Yemen, and started blowing things up there too, by using ex-special forces mercenaries, basically. They still worked in a kind of semi-secret way on behalf of the establishment of Britain, but if they were caught, that was just too bad for them. But they worked, and some of them were selling massive armaments to all these countries. That's how they started off with big armament business. And the new Lightning, for instance, jet fighter that Britain had, selling them across to Arabic countries. But that really doesn't give much employment back home to people. It doesn't spread the economy, but it's for the very, very wealthy. That's where it's making the money from. And it's never changed to the present day. But he does touch on that. And for young guys, it can sound awfully exciting. This carefree, oh yeah, young men take a long time to mature. They do. And it's a natural thing in them to belong to a clan or a tribe and want to go off fighting. They have a small period of want to be a kind of warrior type. And of course, being young and healthy, they think they'll never die anyway. But the thing is, they can admire the adventurers. There's something, that's what their thriller stories are about, or their movies are about. It's about adventurers, really. People who break the rules, and they admire that. So these characters in the special forces would break the rules. They were mercenaries and take their chances and stir up trouble across the world as frontmen for big corporations, massive corporations. And some of the biggest arms sales shows are still held in London today for the world. And the same companies that make the arms quite a few years back decided in a world that it would head towards peace and unification, they'd have to start, and they'd already started targeting mass surveillance technologies for sale, rather than just weaponry, for governments and so on. which we're now in. There's no special, we're all belong to the same country, let's look after each other from these CEOs of corporations, or their investors for that matter. It's pure corporate greed, actually. And they'll exploit countries across the planet and interfere with them too. They always do, unfortunately. And when need be, just like Carl Quigley talked about them using the Jamestown raid, this private clique that worked for the Milner Group at the time. They had the Times reporter they brought over with them to write up the story that the Boers had attacked the British settlements, and in reality it was the other way around. So that they could then use their actual British regular army and have them dispatched over there to protect the British people. But in reality, these little renegade guys had attacked the Boers and stirred it up and paid, it was a woman reporter, I think, to write a fake story for what became the Royal Institute for International Affairs. At that time it was called the Milner Group, or Milner's Kindergarten. Nothing's ever as it appears to be, is it? And if you really dig into reality, what is reality? You'll get more and more levels of it. Don't lose yourself. Not everybody can handle it. And you don't have to know every little name and jot and tittle of things that have happened. It's way too much for anybody. But at least you get an idea of what's happening and keep your sanity as you go through it. As I say, every country has its myths, its foundation myths, every single country, without exception. And it's also, and they've exploited and trained everybody from every country to be born and raised believing in their indoctrination that they're given, with always pride, and they've always got enemies who've done you wrong, and you're taught to hate them forever, etc., which makes you serve the system even harder and harder. Well-worn system. Now, here's how, as I say, everything today has got massive, there's thousands, literally thousands, of sub-agencies all working for the top big agencies in specialized areas of controlling you, and what you think, and what you're going to believe, and all in preparation for wars to come and things like that. Here's some of it here, right? A little bit here. And I mean a little bit, right? That's too much. Inside the temple of covert propaganda, the Integrity Initiative and the UK's scandalous information war. I hate to just pick on the UK, but it's just how there's more stuff come out from there recently. I guarantee to you a lot of the guys working in these agencies, these covert agencies, will convince themselves they're doing the right thing. They will, you know. Others are the psychopaths who have no problem because they're in a kind of marketing war of propaganda. That's what they do, make things up. How do we get the public to believe this? How do we put it across to them? Don't forget what Theresa May's speciality is, and she's worked for the Home Department, for the UK's security or spy agencies, you might call it. Don't forget that too. And her speciality is in marketing, a master marketer. So that's spy agencies and so on, like this one here. And it says the grey zone entered the carefully concealed office of a covert British government-backed propaganda mill that's at the centre of an international scandal, and the mainstream media refuses to touch it. Recently hacked documents revealed an international network of politicians, journalists, academics, researchers and military officers all engaged in highly deceptive covert propaganda campaigns funded by the British Foreign and Commonwealth Office, the FCO. So it isn't just internal, it's also across the planet, the FCO. NATO, Facebook and hardline national security institutions all working together. It says this network of networks, as one of a document refers to them, refers to around an ironically named outfit called the Integrity Initiative. Isn't that wonderful? The Integrity Initiative. It's like George Orwell's Ministry of Love and Truth and Peace and so on. And it is all overseen by a previously unknown England-based think tank registered in Scotland, the Institute for Statecraft, which has operated under a veil of secrecy. The whole operation appears to be run by and in conjunction with members of British military intelligence. And it's got different statements by people who are professional propagandists and so on, and people who work to spot them, etc. It says the most senior government people are professional propagandists and spooks, Miller explained, it says the charity, they call themselves charities, by the way, it's wonderful, eh? Lead on this was also appointed as a colonel in military intelligence at the beginning of the project. So it says the charity lead on this, Chris Donnelly, was appointed as a colonel in military intelligence at the beginning of the project. A truly amazing fact that suggests that this is a military intelligence cutout. That's how they refer to it. And this is David Miller, Professor of Political Sociology at the School of Policy Studies at the University of Bristol and the Director of the Organisation for Propaganda Studies. That's what he said. It's a professional propagandist at this organisation and spooks, made up of spooks. This is a think tank that oversees Integrity Initiative Institute for Statecraft, which also received funding from the British Army and Ministry of Defence. It says this is pretty major. UK government admits that not only the Foreign Office but also the Army and the Ministry of Defence have funded the Institute for Statecraft, the body behind anti-Corbyn propaganda. So they're also putting out they're involved in politics here. I'm not into politics. I think they're all pretty psychopathic anyway. But here they are interfering with and here's the world bashing Russia, saying they're interfering with our folks' politics. But every country has got this particular type of group working with them and inside of them. Also, this Professor Miller explained, this enterprise is an elaborate front for the British military intelligence apparatus. It's covert coordination with friendly politicians and mainstream journalists recalls the Cold War era intrigue known as Operation Mockingbird. And that was an interesting one too. There's links on this article here, and you can look them up yourself. It's quite a long article, actually. Worth reading for those who are into this kind of thing. To give an example how it works. It's sad too, most people in the military, most of the ordinary grunts and so on, and troops and squaddies as they call, in the military, don't know about this either. They're simple old guys like everybody else, pretty simple, get along, etc. Do what you're told, don't cause problems, and maybe you'll get some recognition in the military, and maybe you can get out of it and get a better job than you would have if you hadn't gone into it in the first place. I mean, that's the average person. They don't know that most of what they're getting told is propaganda and misinformation and even brainwashing. Also, this article here, the Integrity Initiative spies and their lies. It's by Sputnik News, which is Russian, I think. But they do go through some interesting information on this too. It's good to look at all stuff because everything's got a spin on it, sure. But you'll get bits and pieces of truth. That's how intelligence agencies get facts anyway. They get newspapers. They used to get newspapers across the world and cut bits and pieces out of them and paste them all together. Information, disinformation, you name it. But you had to get it all and then try to make sense of it. That's how it's done. Nothing's changed, even it's not mainly electronic today. And also, International Institute for Strategic Studies. I'll put this one up too because that's also connected with this thing here. And the Institute for Statecraft, I'll put this up for you as well. Connected too with Smith, Smith Richardson Foundation. It's a private foundation based in Westport, Connecticut, supporting policy research in the realms of foreign and domestic public policy. One of many, by the way. And also are tax-free in their foundations and are covered as charities. Pretty standard stuff, eh? Another one I'll put up is to do with some of the people involved in running these agencies. Another article too I'll put up is the CIA in the media. It was by Carl Bernstein, an old article, but he wrote a lot of stuff about this. I'll put that up for people who, again, there's only a few folk who will wade through all this stuff. I should mention too that I don't necessarily endorse these articles as being the ultimate of truth. However, you can definitely check certain facts within them, and that's all that really matters to me. I expect spins to be put out there on most newspapers and websites, etc. And some people would simply have a point of view that'll never budge as well. However, when it comes to actually analysing intelligence data, you have to go into all different areas. And you'll find sometimes too, and this is a technique I've mentioned before, years ago, that sometimes intelligence agencies will put out conflicting articles about themselves and different agencies they control. And they do control oppositions of pretty well everything as well. It's amazing, eh? They create it's a dialectic basically, but you must control both sides. to get the synthesis, basically. That's how it's run. From the intelligence services themselves. So remember, I'm not pushing one thing or the other. I'm just saying look into everything. If we can verify certain data, then at least you know there's intelligence agencies involved. And all countries use these techniques too. Because all countries to do with intelligence agencies, and top MI5 specialists have said that in interviews long after retirement in Britain, that every job that they had was really to do with subverting someone else's economy in order to get the business to big corporations within London. And that's really how most countries really work. A country is a corporation, really, or a nation is a corporation with a different clique at the top who actually own it all, and you're all trained to believe and work for it. It's quite simple. So always keep it in your mind that you question everything. Just to go back to what I was talking about earlier with Adam Curtis and his articles, even though he'll put his own spin to and omit the elephant in the room on many things, but he's quite right in what he says, that we're given a fake reality, very, very fake, and getting more so all the time with all these professional agencies massively dumping us so much scientifically created propaganda onto us every day. Another one too is to do with Amazon, and this one here. Amazon Web Services announces secret cloud region for the CIA. Another one too is to do with China. China's new antenna, 5 times the size of New York City, but some fear it could be a cancer risk, it says here. So work to build this facility was 13 years in the making, but some researchers have expressed concern about exposure to extremely low frequency waves. Remember the low frequency that person here was working on for? Well, it's a massive project here. It says Project WEM will be able to communicate with submarines under the water, reducing need for them to surface. The US has already got them. Some other countries have too, by the way. It says the giant experimental radio antenna on a piece of land almost 5 times the size of New York City. And it says the wireless electromagnetic method, WEM, project took 13 years to build, but researchers said that it was finally ready to emit extremely low frequency radio waves known as ELF waves. The waves have been linked to cancer by the World Health Organization. Mind you, as I say, all our own countries have got it too, this particular technique. And the WHO, affiliated International Agency for Research on Cancer, has also objected to it, but they're going to get it anyway. It's very similar to other side effects of HARP techniques as well, ELF and so on. And every country's got them, really. It's also the reason, because it can communicate with submarines, it's also affecting, and I mentioned that I gave talks years ago on this, it's affecting the dolphins and even whales. They're beaching themselves because it interferes with their guidance system. Here's something that everyone should be concerned about. Traces of feces have been found on every single McDonald's touchscreen swabbed in an investigation by metro.co.uk. Samples were taken from the new machines that have been rolled out at restaurants across the country, as in Britain. Every one of them had coliform bacteria. And the senior lecturer in microbiology at London Metropolitan University, Dr. Paul Matawelli, said, "We're all surprised how much gut and fecal bacteria there was on this touchscreen machines. I'm not surprised at all. These cause the kind of infections that people pick up in hospitals." Unfortunately, they're using the same kind of touchscreen systems to put all the information about patients in hospitals now. And the staff, they're all rushed, believe you me, they're rushed back and forth, right from the patient's bed to these things, back and forth. There's no common sense here, folks. Of course it's asking for trouble. But I'll put this one up for folk who really care about it. And also, interesting that Walmart has put a patent through for autonomous robot bees. And I think this was from maybe a couple of years ago, the first article I saw on this. But now they've done it. And this is to pollinate plants and so on in different parts of the world. Call them pollination drones. It's interesting that they've brought out a few patents actually from Walmart. Interesting how they're going to expand their business into much, much bigger realms of essential things like your food supply. No, I think that's pretty well it. Remember, you can buy the books and discs at cuttingthroughthematrix.com. and see the other sites that I have and find out how to order books and this and so on, or to donate to me on the website. And because, as I say, things are getting tough as the currencies are being devalued as well. We all know this. We all know it. And people are getting really strained out there and trying to pay for everything that they need. A lot of folk are already so much in debt because the system encourages debt. And Canada is one of the worst countries, apparently, for personal and national debt. I'll put out some articles to do with that, in fact, for Canada and Australia. This is the world of easy money transformed Canada into a debt nation, and that world is coming to an end. That's one article here, and it's got some good information on it, how it's encouraged in the first place. And then Canada government debt to the gross domestic product. And Canada recorded a government debt equivalent to 89.60% of the country's gross domestic product in 2017. And it goes through how it's rising until we're paying more back for the debt, which is compound interest too, by a system we shouldn't even have in the first place, which is not meant to ever get paid off. You can't pay it off, compound interest. Also, Canada's national debt clock, I'll put that up as well, and how they work that out as well. Canada's federal debt and your share of growth of debt per day, per hour. And the one in Australia too is quite good. It says Australia's most exposed to debt crisis state, Street is called, that's where it's from. An awfully good article on prosecutors have their power to alleviate financial burdens, help the poor more easily access constitutional rights as the US, and newly elected should exercise it. It's astonishing how much the states, even local government, depends on fines to pay their bills for the government. And how the poor naturally are suffering the most. They're paying all these fines, which also have interest tacked on if they can't pay. What a system. This is not our system, is it? It really isn't. But I will put up these articles here. I hate even cutting it off so early, actually. I should really do another talk, perhaps, on this, because this reality, as I'm talking about here, the whole idea of bathing the continent and even the world in frequencies like the ELF and so on, from cell towers even, or across the planet by different means, is old. It's been experimented with and used and tested to see if it works, and it does work. I mentioned that years ago to the tested parts of the US with it, and even had lawsuits coming about it too, when people found out what was going on. That's the world we're living in today, because those in control don't want to lose control. It's always been the goal to get control. That's what Brzezinski was talking about to his own peer group. Because the books, like the Technotronic here, are meant for his own peer group and those who work in the Trilateral Commission and the Council on Foreign Relations and the Royal Institute for International Affairs and international affairs organizations across the whole planet now. Every country has them. One big club of a private organization that runs your school system to indoctrinate the children, decides what cultural changes they're going to impose upon you, what they're going to make trendy, even absurd, because they can break all conventional rules and experiment with you and even sit back and laugh at the results. Don't crack up about it, and if it's too much for folk, don't even go into it. There'll still be another tomorrow, unless something out of control happens, of anybody's control. There'll still be another tomorrow. Your life has to go on regardless of all the fear that's generated out there. It does. And always remember that you matter. That's awfully important. And don't get depressed about things. And stop knocking your heads against the wall, thinking everything is your own fault. But when you realize what you're up against, it certainly isn't your own fault. Everything's pushed this way. It's up to you to try to break out for yourself, if you can. And if you can get in touch with our people who understand as well, all the better. All the better if you can. From myself, Alan Watt from Ontario, Canada, it's good night. May your God or your gods go with you.